"Excuse me, what are those pills you're taking?" Those 8 words almost killed a 17-year-old honor student, and his mother's response grounded an entire airplane and changed aviation forever. Have you ever watched someone in authority ignore your medical emergency? Have you felt invisible when your life was literally on the line? Have you seen racism disguised as following protocol while your child suffers? What you're about to hear is the true story of Dr. Keisha Beaumont and her son Damon, a story that exposes how medical discrimination and racial bias can turn a routine flight into a life-threatening nightmare. This isn't just another travel horror story. This is about a mother who refused to stay silent when her son's life hung in the balance, and how her courage sparked a movement that changed airline policies across America. But before we get into this shocking incident, make sure you subscribe to Rise Stories for more untold tales of resilience, injustice, and triumph. These stories need to be heard, and your subscription helps us continue sharing them. Meet Dr. Keisha Beaumont, a respected pediatric doctor at Detroit Children's Hospital, a woman who spent her career saving children's lives. Her 17-year-old son Damon was everything a mother could be proud of. Honor roll student, varsity basketball player, and a young man who managed his type 1 diabetes with the skill of a seasoned medical professional. On this autumn morning at Detroit Airport, excitement filled the air. Damon was about to board Flight 2847 to Atlanta for a college recruitment visit to Morehouse College, the trip that could determine his entire future. He had been managing his diabetes for 5 years, carrying his glucose tablets and insulin pen like any other daily necessity. His mother double-checked his medical supplies one last time, a routine they had perfected over the years. The glucose tablets were clearly labeled in his backpack's front pocket, ready for any emergency. They had flown together dozens of times before without incident. Neither of them knew that in less than 2 hours, a flight attendant's ignorance and prejudice would put Damon's life in danger, transform Dr. Beaumont into an unlikely activist, and create a viral moment that would force an entire industry to confront its discriminatory practices. What happened next would shock you. A medical emergency met with cruelty, a mother's desperate fight to save her son, and a confrontation at 30,000 feet that grounded more than just one airplane. It grounded a system that allowed racism to masquerade as safety protocols. Are you ready for this story? Let me tell you more about Damon Beaumont. At 17, this young man was already breaking barriers. While most teenagers struggled with basic responsibilities, Damon was juggling AP classes, varsity basketball, and managing a chronic medical condition that could kill him if he made one mistake. Diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at age 12, Damon had transformed from a scared kid afraid of needles into someone who could calculate insulin doses faster than most adults could balance a checkbook. His teammates called him the calculator because he could estimate carbs in any meal just by looking at it. His teachers praised his discipline. His coaches admired his dedication. But it was his relationship with his mother that truly defined him. Dr. Keisha Beaumont wasn't just a pediatric doctor. She was Damon's medical safety net, his biggest supporter, and his closest friend. She had spent countless hours teaching him everything about his condition, from recognizing early warning signs to handling emergency situations. Their morning routine was like a well-rehearsed dance: blood sugar check, insulin calculation, medication pack verification. "You're more prepared than most medical students," she would often joke, but the pride in her voice was unmistakable. On flight days, their preparation was even more thorough. Dr. Beaumont always packed backup supplies in her own carry-on, kept copies of Damon's medical records in her purse, and made sure his glucose tablets were easily accessible. They had this system down to a science because they had to. Damon's life depended on it. As they approached gate B12 that morning, Damon bounced on his toes with excitement. Morehouse College had been his dream school since middle school. The historically black college had produced doctors, lawyers, civil rights leaders, and entrepreneurs. Walking those halls would be like stepping into his future. "Mom, can you believe this is actually happening?" he asked, adjusting his backpack straps. Coach Williams said their pre-med program is incredible. Dr. Beaumont smiled, watching her son's enthusiasm. "Baby, you've worked so hard for this moment. Just remember to stay hydrated during the tour, and check my blood sugar every 2 hours." Damon finished with a grin. "Mom, I got this. Besides, you'll be right there with me." The boarding process went smoothly. They settled into their seats in row 14, Damon by the window, so he could watch Atlanta approach. The flight was only half full, mostly business travelers and a few families. The atmosphere was relaxed, quiet conversations mixing with the hum of passengers finding their seats. Damon pulled out his biology textbook, reviewing cellular respiration one more time. His AP exam was next week, and he refused to let this trip interfere with his perfect GPA. Dr. Beaumont organized her patient files on her tablet, stealing glances at her son and marveling at how responsible he had become. If you've ever felt discriminated against because of your medical condition, your race, or simply for being different, drop your story in the comments below. Your voice matters, and these experiences need to be shared. Flight 2847 taxied down the runway right on schedule. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom with the standard safety announcements and weather report for Atlanta. Everything felt routine, normal, safe. Damon looked out the window as Detroit grew smaller below them, then opened his textbook to Chapter 12. His mother reviewed a case file about a young patient with similar diabetes management challenges. Both were lost in their own worlds, comfortable in the quiet efficiency of their travel routine. Neither of them could have known that within the next hour, their peaceful journey would become a nightmare that tested everything they believed about fairness, justice, and human decency. A routine medical procedure would be treated as a criminal act, and a mother's love would collide head-on with ignorance and prejudice at 30,000 feet. 45 minutes into the flight, Damon felt the first warning sign. It started subtly, a slight tremor in his hands as he turned the page of his textbook. Most people wouldn't have noticed, but Damon had learned to recognize his body's alarm system. The tremor was followed by that familiar cold sweat starting at his forehead, then the unmistakable lightheaded sensation that made the airplane cabin feel like it was tilting. His body was running out of fuel. "Mom," he whispered, closing his textbook and reaching for his backpack. "I need to check." Dr. Beaumont immediately shifted into medical mode. She had seen this transition hundreds of times, but it never got easier. Her son's face was already losing color, and she could see the slight confusion in his eyes that came with dropping blood sugar. Damon's movements were practiced and efficient despite his growing discomfort. He pulled out his glucose monitor, a small device that had become as essential to him as his wallet. The lancet pricked his finger with a quick snap, and he squeezed a tiny drop of blood onto the test strip. The machine beeped after 5 seconds. 68 milligrams per deciliter. Dr. Beaumont's heart sank. Normal blood sugar ranges between 70 to 99 mg/dl. At 68, Damon was entering dangerous territory. Without immediate treatment, he could lose consciousness within minutes. "Okay, baby," she said calmly, though every maternal instinct was screaming. "Let's get those glucose tablets right now." Damon nodded, his movements becoming slightly unsteady. The hypoglycemia was affecting his coordination now. He reached into the front pocket of his backpack where he always kept his emergency glucose tablets. Small, white, chalky circles that could save his life in moments like this. His hands shook as he opened the small plastic container. The tablets were clearly labeled, "Glucose tablets, for low blood sugar, fast acting." The container even had nutritional information and instructions for diabetic emergencies printed right on the side. As Damon tried to shake out the recommended 4 tablets, his trembling hands betrayed him. Several tablets scattered across his tray table, rolling in different directions. One fell to the floor with a small bounce. Dr. Beaumont watched her son's condition deteriorate in real time. His skin was becoming clammy, and she could see the telltale signs of confusion setting in. At 68 milligrams per deciliter, his brain wasn't getting enough glucose to function properly. If his blood sugar dropped below 50, he could have a seizure or slip into a diabetic coma. "Take 4 tablets, sweetheart," she coached gently, helping him gather the scattered medication. "Chew them completely, then we'll recheck in 15 minutes. This was the scene unfolding in row 14, a mother watching her son fight to stay conscious while his body betrayed him. Dr. Beaumont's medical training told her exactly what was happening. Damon's pancreas couldn't produce insulin to regulate his blood sugar, and his carefully calculated morning insulin dose had worked too efficiently, dropping his glucose to life-threatening levels. She knew that without these tablets, her honor student-athlete son would lose consciousness within minutes. His body would shut down non-essential functions to preserve his brain, but even that wouldn't last long. Severe hypoglycemia could cause permanent brain damage or death. Damon picked up the first tablet with unsteady fingers, his motor skills clearly compromised. The sweet, chalky taste would normally be unpleasant, but right now it was literally life-saving sugar rushing to his bloodstream. "Good job, baby," Dr. Beaumont whispered, monitoring his breathing and skin color. 2 more tablets. As a pediatric endocrinologist, she had treated hundreds of diabetic children. She had taught countless parents to recognize these exact symptoms. She had saved lives with these exact same glucose tablets. But when it was her own son struggling to chew simple sugar tablets while his blood sugar plummeted, all her medical expertise felt helpless against her maternal fear. The tablets on his tray table looked innocent enough, small white circles that could fit in a child's palm. To anyone else, they might look like mints or vitamins. But to Dr. Beaumont, they represented the thin line between her son's life and a medical emergency that could end tragically. Damon reached for his 3rd tablet, his movements still shaky but slightly more coordinated. The fast-acting glucose was already beginning to work, sending sugar directly into his bloodstream where his body desperately needed it. That's when the flight attendant appeared beside their row. "Excuse me, what are those pills you're taking?" The voice was sharp, demanding, and came from a woman in her mid-30s wearing the navy blue uniform of Nationwide Airlines. Rebecca Thornfield had been walking down the aisle when she spotted the white tablets scattered across Damon's tray table. Dr. Beaumont looked up from monitoring her son's condition. "Those are glucose tablets," she explained calmly, maintaining her professional demeanor. "My son is diabetic, and his blood sugar has dropped to a dangerous level. These are medically necessary." Thornfield's eyes narrowed as she stared at the innocent-looking tablets. Her gaze shifted between Damon, who was still struggling with his coordination, and the medication on his tray. "I'm going to need to confiscate those immediately." "Ma'am," Dr. Beaumont said, her voice still controlled but with an edge of concern, "I'm a pediatric endocrinologist. These are over-the-counter glucose tablets that my son needs to prevent a diabetic emergency. They're clearly labeled, and I have his medical documentation right here." She reached for her purse, where she always kept copies of Damon's medical records, prescriptions, and her own medical credentials. But Thornfield held up her hand like a stop sign. "I don't care what kind of doctor you claim to be." The words hit the cabin like a slap. The devastating dismissal hung in the air, and Dr. Beaumont felt her professional composure begin to crack. In her 15 years as a physician, no one had ever dismissed her medical expertise so callously, especially when her child's life was at stake. These could be drugs, Thornfield continued, her voice getting louder and drawing attention from nearby passengers. Passengers are not allowed to consume unidentified pills during flight. This is a federal safety regulation. Damon, despite feeling increasingly unwell, tried to intervene. His speech was slightly slurred from the hypoglycemia, but he held up the small container with shaking hands. "Ma'am, these aren't drugs. Look at the label. It says glucose tablets right here with all the nutritional information." He pointed to the clear labeling that showed exactly what the tablets were, their sugar content, and their intended use for managing low blood sugar. The container looked exactly like what you'd find in any pharmacy's diabetes section. Thornfield barely glanced at the label. Her mind was already made up. "I've made my decision. These are being confiscated immediately." What happened next shocked everyone in the surrounding rows. Thornfield reached across Damon, swept the remaining tablets from his tray table into her palm, then grabbed the container from his trembling hands. "You cannot take my son's medication," Dr. Beaumont said, her voice rising for the first time. "He is having a medical emergency right now. His blood sugar is dangerously low, and without those tablets, he could go into hypoglycemic shock." Passengers in nearby seats began turning around, sensing the confrontation escalating. A businessman in row 13 put down his laptop. A young mother in row 15 whispered to her husband. An elderly couple across the aisle exchanged worried glances. "That's not my problem," Thornfield replied coldly, clutching Damon's life-saving medication in her fist. "If he needs medical attention, he should have declared it before boarding. This is a security issue now." The callousness of her response sent murmurs through the cabin. Passengers were beginning to understand what they were witnessing, a medical emergency being treated as a criminal act. Dr. Beaumont looked at her son, whose condition was visibly worsening. His skin was pale and clammy, his hands were trembling more violently, and she could see the confusion in his eyes intensifying. At 68 milligrams per deciliter and dropping, every minute without treatment brought him closer to unconsciousness. "Please," she said, her professional mask finally slipping to reveal a terrified mother. "Those are just sugar tablets. Any diabetic person carries them. My son could die without them." "I don't believe you," Thornfield snapped back. "These look suspicious to me." The tension in the cabin was now impossible to ignore. Passengers were pulling out their phones, some recording the confrontation, others whispering among themselves about what they were witnessing. A few people tried to intervene verbally, but Thornfield remained unmoved. "Have you witnessed discrimination like this? Medical bias that puts lives at risk? Share this video to spread awareness because these incidents happen more often than you think, and silence only enables more harm." Dr. Beaumont realized with growing horror that reasoning with this woman was impossible. Her son's blood sugar was continuing to drop, while his medication sat useless in the flight attendant's closed fist. She was watching her child's life hang in the balance while prejudice masqueraded as protocol. The stakes couldn't be clearer. Without immediate intervention, Damon could lose consciousness, have a seizure, or worse. His brain needed glucose to function, and every passing second brought him closer to a medical catastrophe that could have been prevented with 5 cents worth of over-the-counter sugar tablets. This was no longer about airline regulations or security protocols. This had become a fight for her son's life against someone who seemed determined to ignore medical reality. Dr. Beaumont's mind shifted into strategic mode. Years of handling medical emergencies had taught her when talking fails, action saves lives. Looking at her son's deteriorating condition and Thornfield's stubborn grip on his medication, she realized this woman would never listen to reason. Time for a different approach. She pressed the call button for another flight attendant, but her real plan was already in motion. Dr. Beaumont pulled out her phone and dialed 3 numbers that would change everything. 911. "This is Dr. Keisha Beaumont. she said loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "I'm calling to report a medical emergency on Nationwide Airlines Flight 2847, currently en route from Detroit to Atlanta. My son is a type 1 diabetic experiencing severe hypoglycemia, and the flight crew has confiscated his glucose tablets. I need this aircraft diverted to the nearest airport immediately for medical intervention." The 911 dispatcher, trained to take medical emergencies seriously, immediately connected Dr. Beaumont to air traffic control while simultaneously dispatching emergency medical services to Cincinnati Airport, the nearest major facility to their current location. Thornfield's face went pale as she realized the implications of what was happening. "Ma'am, you can't just watch me, Dr." Beaumont interrupted. Within 3 minutes, the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a medical emergency on board and will be making an unscheduled landing in Cincinnati. Emergency medical personnel will be meeting the aircraft. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." The cabin erupted in concerned murmurs, but Dr. Beaumont wasn't finished. As the plane began its descent, she did something that would make this incident impossible to ignore or cover up. She started recording. "My name is Dr. Keisha Beaumont," she said into her phone's camera, her voice steady despite her obvious distress. "I am a pediatric endocrinologist, and I am currently on Nationwide Airlines Flight 2847 with my 17-year-old son Damon, who is type 1 diabetic." She held up her medical license and hospital ID badge to the camera. 20 minutes ago, my son's blood sugar dropped to dangerous levels, and he needed his glucose tablets, over-the-counter medication that any diabetic carries for exactly this situation. Dr. Beaumont turned the camera toward Thornfield, who was still standing in the aisle, looking increasingly uncomfortable as passengers began recording with their own phones. "This flight attendant confiscated my son's clearly labeled glucose tablets, claiming they violated federal regulations. There is no such regulation. My son is now in medical distress because this woman chose to ignore medical necessity." The live stream was already gaining viewers as passengers shared the video in real time. Comments began flooding in from other parents, medical professionals, and people who had experienced similar discrimination. Then Dr. Beaumont said the words that would make this story explode across social media. "I have to ask the question that's burning in my heart right now. Would this woman have confiscated insulin from a white businessman in first class? Would she have ignored the medical credentials of a white doctor? Would she have dismissed the clear labeling on medication if my son didn't look like someone she automatically viewed as suspicious?" The cabin fell silent except for the sound of phone cameras recording. Dr. Beaumont had named what everyone was thinking but afraid to say. Would she have done this to a white businessman? She repeated, looking directly at Thornfield through her phone camera. "My son is an honor student heading to a college interview. He's been managing his diabetes for 5 years. The only thing different about this flight is her attitude toward him personally." The hashtag flight while black was already trending as passengers shared the video. Medical professionals began commenting with their own stories of discrimination. Diabetes advocates started sharing the potentially deadly consequences of interfering with diabetic care. Dr. Beaumont had transformed a medical emergency into a viral moment that would force an entire industry to confront its biases. Flight 2847 touched down at Cincinnati Airport with emergency vehicles waiting on the tarmac. Paramedics boarded immediately, rushing to row 14, where Damon sat pale and shaking, his blood sugar having dropped even further during the descent. The first paramedic took one look at the situation and asked, "Where are his glucose tablets?" Dr. Beaumont pointed to Thornfield, who was still clutching the confiscated medication. She took them away from him during his hypoglycemic episode. The paramedic's expression shifted to disbelief. "Ma'am, These are over-the-counter glucose tablets. Diabetic passengers carry these on every flight. There's no regulation against them whatsoever. He immediately opened a fresh container of identical tablets and gave them to Damon. Take 4 of these right now, son. You're at 52 milligrams per deciliter. That's dangerously low. As Damon's blood sugar slowly stabilized, the real storm was just beginning online. Dr. Beaumont's live stream had been shared thousands of times during the flight. The hashtags #medical discrimination, #flightwhileblack, and #diabeticsdeservebetter were trending across all social platforms. Comments poured in from medical professionals, parents, and diabetes advocates sharing their own stories of prejudice and discrimination. This is Dr. Martinez from Johns Hopkins, read one comment. I've seen this exact discrimination in hospitals. Thank you for speaking up. Another comment, my diabetic daughter faces this bias constantly. People see a young black person with medication and assume the worst. The American Diabetes Association issued a statement within hours, calling the incident unconscionable and demanding immediate policy changes from airlines nationwide. Like this video if you believe medical discrimination has no place in 2024 and that everyone deserves equal treatment regardless of their race or medical condition. But Nationwide Airlines' initial response only fueled more outrage. Their first statement defended Thornfield's actions, claiming she had followed proper security protocols and acted in the best interest of passenger safety. This tone-deaf response backfired spectacularly. Medical experts flooded social media explaining that glucose tablets pose zero security risk. Parents shared videos of their own children's identical medications. Even flight attendants from other airlines spoke out, confirming that diabetic supplies have never been prohibited. The public backlash was swift and devastating. #boycott nationwide started trending as travelers canceled flights and chose competitors. Stock prices dropped. News outlets picked up the story, with medical commentators explaining the potentially fatal consequences of Thornfield's actions. Within 48 hours, the airline was forced to issue a second statement, this time apologizing to the Beaumont family and announcing immediate policy reviews. The power of going viral for justice had worked. Dr. Beaumont's decision to live stream the discrimination had protected her son and potentially saved countless other passengers from similar treatment. But the story was far from over. The video had now been viewed millions of times, sparking conversations in medical schools, airline training programs, and family dinner tables across America. What started as one mother's desperate attempt to save her son's life had become a movement that would change how airlines handle medical discrimination forever. The question now was, what lasting changes would come from this viral moment of injustice? The changes came fast and nationwide. Within 1 week, Nationwide Airlines completely overhauled their medical accommodation policies. Rebecca Thornfield was quietly reassigned to non-passenger duties pending review. The airline implemented mandatory sensitivity training for all crew members, specifically addressing medical discrimination and unconscious bias. But the impact spread far beyond one company. The Department of Transportation issued new federal guidelines clarifying that common diabetic supplies, including glucose tablets, insulin, and testing equipment, cannot be confiscated by airline personnel under any circumstances. Dr. Beaumont never wanted to become an activist, but her son's experience had thrust her into the spotlight. Sometimes the worst moments in our lives become catalysts for the most important changes, she reflected during a national television interview. I just wanted to save my son's life, but apparently that wasn't allowed without a fight. For Damon, the experience became transformative in unexpected ways. His college application essay about overcoming discrimination and advocating for others with chronic conditions helped him earn full scholarships to multiple universities, including his dream school, Morehouse College. I learned that staying silent about injustice doesn't protect anyone, Damon said during his graduation speech. Sometimes you have to speak up, even when your voice shakes. Today, he's a pre-med student studying biochemistry, following in his mother's footsteps toward becoming an endocrinologist. He still carries his glucose tablets everywhere, but thanks to his mother's courage, he'll never worry about discrimination during medical emergencies again. Subscribe and hit the bell. These stories of resilience and justice need to be heard, shared, and remembered. Dr. Keisha Beaumont's story teaches us 3 powerful lessons. First, discrimination often hides behind policy and protocol. When authority figures dismiss your legitimate concerns, especially medical emergencies, don't accept it silently. Second, a mother's love knows no boundaries. Dr. Beaumont risked everything: her reputation, her comfort, even potential legal consequences, to protect her son's life. That fierce protection created change that benefits thousands of other families. Third, one moment of courage can transform entire systems. Her decision to live stream that discrimination didn't just save Damon's life. It changed federal aviation policies and protected countless future passengers from similar treatment. Sometimes standing up to injustice feels impossible, but Dr. Beaumont proved that one person's courage can move mountains. Her refusal to stay quiet when her son faced life-threatening discrimination created waves of change that continue today. What would you have done in Dr. Beaumont's shoes? Comment below and don't forget to share this story, because these moments of injustice and triumph need to be heard by everyone.